Now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Samantha Haney. We are so glad that she is here with us to talk about how to bridge the technical content gap in the marketplace. Samantha Haney, MCP, is the founding partner at Waypoint Ventures, a technical learning content development company that creates engaging and accessible courseware. After noticing a need for content creation services that were agile, thorough, and accessible to all learners, Samantha created Waypoint, which she now leads with two other partners. Nearly 2 decades later, Waypoint has a uniquely trained development team who holds certifications from a wide variety of technologies, and the company publishes hundreds of hours of learning content for global audiences of all ages, careers, and abilities. Before Samantha dove into the technical content creation realm, she was a news reporter and journalist, covering a variety of beats for publications in the Pacific Northwest. As a reminder to all our attendees, this conference is being recorded. We will have Q&A at the end of this presentation. Please use the Q&A tool if you have a question for the speaker. The stage is all yours, Sam. You can now share your content and unmute yourself. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the introduction, Sana. I appreciate it. Now I'm going to have to rewrite my introduction slide because I forgot that you had all that data. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. At least it is morning here. I'm going to turn my camera on. It is morning here in the Pacific Northwest. I live in Seattle, Washington, in the United States. And my topic today is technical content that succeeds in the marketplace. Before we get into that, to unpack those concepts, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. Slide to move. There we go. I started my career, as Sana mentioned, as a newspaper reporter. And that little cartoon there is Brenda Starr. I don't actually remember Brenda Starr in the comics, but it's hard to find a positive imagery for journalists these days. I worked at weekly papers. Weekly papers are kind of a traditional starting place. I did do some work at a daily paper, but I chose to stay at weeklies because of the connection I found. I found a connection to people, to the stories, to the community. You're going to hear me use that word connection quite a bit today because it's something that fuels my sort of personal and professional goals. And if you can imagine, it's definitely a test when someone walks into the newsroom because they know your byline, they know you, to challenge you about a story, but it's still a connection. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. In 2003, I found myself in content development 20 years ago, just after my time with the Peace Corps, noticing that need for technical content and services that would be agile, would be thorough, would be accessible. So I founded Waypoint Ventures to focus on adult education. And I wanted to expand horizons, educational horizons, that is, to prepare learners for what I thought would be great opportunities in IT. Reflecting on my Peace Corps experience, my job, briefly, was to connect with 19 villages on a small island with only 2 months of learning Samoan language and culture and bicycle for transportation. The villages were spanned about 20 miles on a coastal roadway. It is the single most challenging connection effort that I've ever endeavored. And keep in mind, by that time, I had a history of a crime reporter where I had to connect with law enforcement, a technical writer where I had to connect with developers. So definitely challenging. I had to be inventive. I had to be vulnerable. I had to be indefatigable. And I had to do it fluent in Samoan. So some of those values haven't changed. And I am really grateful for that experience because it continued to cement my commitment to this marketplace. But I also have to say I'm pretty happy that I do my job in English and that I don't have to start meetings with a dance because, yep, that was a thing. So meanwhile, I split my time between Seattle, Washington, and Kona, Hawaii. And that's because mostly because most of my extracurriculars are water-based. I have a sailboat that I cruise in the Pacific Northwest. I'm a Coast Guard captain so that I can teach sailing and race sailboats. I'm an accomplished open water swimmer. And I'm also an avid, dare I say, rabid soccer, wait a second, I gotta know my audience, footy fan. So I'm a big fan of the Seattle Sounders and the Reign. So a little bit about Waypoint. We produce successful and exceptional courseware for 20 years. We work with Microsoft. They tend to direct what we make for them, but you can see dozens of our commissioned courses on Microsoft Learn. We've been participating with Microsoft since Mock and evolved with them. We also publish our own courses on technical subjects. And then we also are hired regularly by companies to build internal courseware for them that can be ILT or can be e-learning. So now we get to the topic. And marketplace, I wanted to unpack, what do we mean by success? What do we mean by marketplace? I'm pretty confident we have some shared ground in those topics, not the least of which is it's really crowded. And part of the reason it's crowded is the estimated worth of our industry is $3.7 billion. So how do you sound out in this crowded field? My answer is be exceptional. And it's not just rhetorical. I'm going to show you some of our theories and best practices, how we do it. Quantitatively, we're looking for performance indicators that come from our revenue, that come from the courses lasting, that we get very low error reports, and if we can gather any KPIs from learner satisfaction, we absolutely are hungry for that. Some of the qualitative key performance indicators are things that, our revenue is also supporting our product research and development, that our content teams are engaged and bringing new ideas, and I can bring new people to the team. And lastly, customer hugs, because it matters. And I'll come back around to that. I wanted to touch on, how do we compete in this market as one of the smaller content providers? When you hear things like corporate workers only have 24 minutes a week to focus on their professional education, I think about how do I win those precious moments and how do I continue to win them? So we focus on what learners tell us they need. And those are illustrated in the slide that I've got for you. Easy to access, generally on demand, on their desktop, on their phone, some other device, lots of experience, something that relates to what they do in their job, in their career, in their future. We want to make sure that we're inclusive because you want learners to see themselves in their content, and we want to be cognizant and activating with their goals. If it's a career change, a career advancement, certification. So before I get ahead of myself, because I am going to give you a little bit of a case study to give you a taste of how we tie these things into the marketplace where we work. It is crowded, and we all want a piece of that market. But I would sort of ask you to ask yourself, do you want to break in or do you want to stand out? We are trying to stand out. We are trying to make a marketplace that attracts customers who appreciate the methods that we use to meet their needs where they are right now. So let me share a story from a recent development project. A customer asked us to create a course that would level set fundamental project management concept, capacity planning. We needed to do that for staff and for their customers. It's a minor concept for them, but they found that the lack of knowledge to the interpretation of the knowledge was interrupting progress and sometimes even blocked project progress. So their 4-hour lecture, over slides with no activities, no quizzes, no assessment, wasn't changing that paradigm. The end-to-end story is a little long for today, but I can share you a glimpse of our method. And by the way, it didn't start with this slide. I threw this up here just because, it's really complex, kind of in your face. And this is the kind of thing where we really excel in transforming something that's complex into something that is, dare I say, digestible. Wait till you see the next slide. We needed to see a concept that an audience could share. We needed that for people who are new to it. We needed that for people who needed to align to, so everybody having the same concept. So we started like we always do. Where do we meet these learners where they are right now? Why are they going to take our course? What outcomes do they seek? What outcomes did our customers seek? So we started with a sandwich because when we answer those questions, we can come up with an appropriate form factor. Is it instructor-led? Is it independent e-learning? Is it a blend? How are we going to craft a ratio of knowledge, which usually comes from reading or lectures, with engaging exercises or demonstrations? And then what materials do we need so that when the student is done with their class, that they have something to help them with retention? In this case, the sandwich was an excellent metaphor for us to work with. And if it's lunchtime in your time zone, I apologize. I owe you. So briefly, capacity planning is about estimating. So we needed something a metaphor for our audience. So how to be inclusive when you're selecting those metaphors is part of meeting your learners where they are. So we figured a sandwich was a pretty good global image, not offensive. It was a neutral and safe space for the whole audience to meet. It gave us great activities and to blend the visuals with the words, with the activities. And it was an easy concept for learners to grasp and pivot. So the question eventually was, how long does it take to build a sandwich? And then they have to answer, optimistic estimates, most likely estimates, pessimistic estimates. But they're all sharing an experience as they get towards their goals. So at this point, several thousand people are taking this course. They're building really smart capacity plans. They understand why. They're using a sophisticated tool. Maybe they're making sandwiches too. I hope so. But we feel that they left, and not just feelings, but we've received the quantitative results that they're leaving with quantitative and qualitative understanding, capacity management. Because we introduced easy to conceive concepts via images, via our scripts, interactivity, and self-checks. We brought complicated formula to life by kind of reimagining it, bringing some imagery, some activities, and then we also left them with a quick reference guide and the ability to return to their course at any time they needed just a quick refresher. So yeah, at the conclusion of this project, I did get a hug from the CEO, and because they saw themselves in their learning, they saw their product in their learning, as well as their learners. And so I don't want to overlook the value of what I call the happiness fuel, because it motivates our team too. It's not always easy to do what we do. It's not always easy to connect. We write software on, courseware on some of the most sophisticated software products available. But if our courses aren't illustrating how they can use it, why they should follow our guidance, then we're kind of just marketing. And I really like to think that our courses are inspiring our users, advancing them, and transforming them by meeting their goals. So if you ask me what's fundamental to receiving this kind of compliment, it's really connecting with your audience where they are and meeting their needs. So let's talk about knowing your audience. I think this is probably a quintessential concept for a lot of things, but I think it bears mentioning because of the outcomes. Who's listening? What do they need? How do they need it? I'm deliberately leaving out when, because that answer is always yesterday. And I think we are probably all pretty familiar with that need. But I did want to just touch on why I brought up that we chose a metaphor that was neutral and safe. And it comes from, some references to adult learning education that we have that has stood the test of time. I'm sure you're familiar with Malcolm Knowles, Edward Lindemann, who talked about, adult learners, they require a climate to have, to do their learning that is safe, that's highly motivating, where they're participating in the learning product. They also work their best when we're relating to their life experience and they're directing it. So again, really important that we're talking to them to find out what is your goal? Is it a new career, advancement, certification? What are our customers' goals? Are they looking at a course or a learning path? Do they want large scale or small scale? And to be ready to consult with them, because they're seeing things that we might not have seen. So we have to be experts in what's good for them and good for their audience. And I would say, in addition, what's important here is those key strategic partnerships. We don't do it all. we have those partners, and we look for partners who have similar interests and values. We try to inject feedback into our courseware all the time. So we meet with instructors, we invite them to be technical reviewers. We're gathering consumption analytics, who starts, who finishes, how they do on their assessments. Beta classes and focus groups are great. Those are the key ways that we will meet with people and gather that information to make sure that we are staying on target. So who's on my team? Diversity is one of the key ways to keep the ideas fresh, inclusive, and it's kind of an alchemy of what keeps us successful. It's not easy to stay in this market for 2 decades and stay relevant. So our teams are equally a part of that as our products. So our writers are from around the world. They tend to be teaching technical content. They tend to be consulting in the industry. That is amazing. They're bringing sort of the world to us implicitly and explicitly to make sure that we're engaged and sensitive to the needs of everybody. Our instructional designers, they're sort of the key of what's the best practice for transferring knowledge and skills to our learners? How do we help learners stick to the class, get something from their assessments, make sure that the 24 minutes that they have belong to us and that they'll be back. They're also really important for, so they're respecting the learner, they're also respecting the business, meaning we can't have a lot of customizations. We can have some, and we'd love to do that, but we need to make our products genuinely repeatable and scalable so that we can meet the business needs as well. And also we have some pretty exhaustive quality controls, and we've got accessibility as number one. We design and we build with accessibility in mind. We think about the language we use, we think about the images we use in all of our content, and then finally the end-to-end testing so that there's rigor and students know that they can expect the level of excellence and, end-to-end functioning labs and that sort of thing. I've sat through plenty of betas where incredibly sophisticated labs, they run super smoothly and the students find a comma out of place. And there's learners will reliably let you know your wins and losses. So we really are scrupulous about keeping our content clean. So exceptional courses have these items to them as far as my opinion goes. Making it real world for everyone. There's 1 billion people worldwide with a sensory, mobility, or developmental disability. So begin with accessibility, begin with inclusion so that the real world represents everyone. We find it pretty easy to find the right tools, the right training to support our audiences. We also are choosy about our words and our images, like I mentioned, so that we are inclusive. We scrub for sensory language. We make sure that our current events are top-notch so that we're not putting in a picture that might traumatize or isn't appropriate. Make sure it's experiential. If your lab is kind of academic, meaning everything works, it's a singular sort of setup. You're not challenging the user, so you want to invent exercises that challenge to solve problems, not just exercise functions. Demonstrations are a great way to show people less obvious but helpful techniques. Most software offers a dozen or so ways to do one thing. Help them understand why and how that can be helpful. And then be supportive by featuring things like knowledge checks, assessments, quick reference guides, things that when your student, your learner is out of the classroom, that they have a way to tie back and exercise what they've learned. And durability really comes down to the business side of things, where we're talking about easy and cost-effective designs that we can update. That while we build it in English, we are sensitive to when it gets translated, that other languages take up more space by virtue of the sentence construction or the alphabet. We don't want to have to rewrite a course to reproduce it in any other language, and that the subject matter is broad enough for all of the audiences. So I believe that's about my time, if not a little over my time. Apologies for that. So I thank you so much for tuning into my presentation. Hopefully I can have a few more minutes I'd love to hear from you if there's any questions that anybody has.